Hello, 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 boys and girls. Told you I'd be back soon. Now, there are a whole lot of patterns on this board, but I'm going to start with these on the side. So every week, when I ask you to do your handwriting in your new handwriting book, on the end line, I ask you to do a pattern. Now that you know what a pattern is, you can choose anything to complete that line. You don't need to do it in the letter that we are doing. So for example, this week we are doing D, you don't need to do your pattern with the letter D. I have asked you to do a pattern with ducks or dinosaur heads. And we could also maybe use dogs. All the D things. Last week you had to make a pattern with apples. So red, green and red apples. And remember in the last video we said a pattern is the same thing over and over again. So on the side I've done some patterns that if you are asked to find the pattern and carry it on, that you know what to do. And also, if you have to do your own pattern in your handwriting book, you can do something with shapes or colors like this. So the first one, let's check if it's the correct pattern. Black diamond, red circle with a dot. Black diamond, red circle with the dot. Black diamond, red circle with the dot. So that is the correct pattern because it's the same thing over and over and over again. And here we have 2 triangles, 2 black triangles, 2 red dots, 1, 2, 3 black lines, 2 black triangles, 2 red dots, 1, 2, 3 black lines, 2 triangles, 2 red dots, 1, 2, 3 black lines. So both of those are perfectly good patterns. So you can do something like this in your handwriting book if you have been asked to make your own pattern. Now let's have a look at our numbers. And these are kinds of examples that you are going to have in your Brown Maths book this week. And then at the end of the week, you're going to complete them on a sheet of paper so that I can see how clever you are. Now there are 2 rules for patterns when we start. Number 1 is we need to find out what the pattern is. So what are we counting in? Number 2, are we counting forwards? Is the pattern getting bigger or is the pattern getting smaller? And if it's getting smaller, we are counting backwards. So for each of these patterns, I'm going to ask those 2 questions. Right, let's start with the number 1. So the first thing you do is you find 2 numbers in the pattern that are next to each other so you can work out the pattern because that's the first thing you have to do. So from 4 to 5, we have 1 jump. So we are counting in ones, right? And is 4 getting bigger by going to 8 or getting smaller? Yes, it's getting bigger. So we are counting this way. So we go 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Our first one is done. Right, our next 2 questions. We find 2 numbers next to each other, 14 to 13. 13 comes right next to 14, but it normally comes on that side. So that gives us a clue. But 14 to 13, again, is 1 jump. And 14 is much bigger than 9. So now we know that we are counting backwards because this pattern is getting smaller. So 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. Right? The next one, 2 questions. What are we counting in? Find 2 numbers next to each other. 10 and 12. 10 to 11 is 1 jump. 10 to 12 is another jump. So we are counting in 2s. 10 to 12, we're counting in 2s. And 6 is smaller than 12. So this pattern's getting bigger. We're counting this way. So let's count in 2s. 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15, 16. Counting in 2s. Right, the next one. What do we do first? 2 questions. What are we counting in? Find 2 numbers next to each other and see what we're counting in. Because if you don't do that, you could make a little mistake. If I look at this quickly and I say, 20, 30, we're definitely counting in 10s. But I didn't see this little 5 there to trick me. So I found 2 numbers next to each other. From 30 to 35, 31, 32, 33, 34, 35. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're counting in 5s. Remember, it goes 5, 10, 15, 20. And we showed you that on the number chart in the last video. So it goes 20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. And the very last one, 90 to 80. What are these? Yes, we're counting in 10s. And our last question, are we going forwards or backwards? Is 90 bigger or smaller than 50? No, 50 is much smaller. So the pattern is getting smaller, so we are counting backwards. 90, 80, 70, 60, 50. Right, boys and girls, you have some pages to do in your Brown Maths books. Remember those 2 questions. Each time you try and find out what the pattern is. Number 1, what are we counting in? Find 2 numbers next to each other and see how they are getting bigger or smaller. What are you counting in? Number 1. Number 2, are we counting forwards so that the pattern goes bigger, or are we counting backwards that the pattern goes smaller? And you may use your number chart to help you. And I know you're going to work hard to get all of those nicely done in your Brown Maths book.